Hello.
Hello. All right. Hello. Welcome everyone to A Journey to Remember Black History in Memphis, featuring Carolyn Michael Banks from A Tour of Possibilities. We are so excited to have everyone here to walk through some of the African-American gems of Memphis with one of our favorite local tour guides and historians. Today's event, we will start off with introductions, and then we'll do our presentation on the different sites in Memphis connected to Black history. We will then talk about the launch of the Tour Possibilities Caravan Tours this Juneteenth and their audio tour launching in July. Finally, we'll have opportunity to take questions from the chat. So if you would put your questions in the chat, you can do that anytime throughout the presentation. We'll ask Carolyn to respond to those questions before we wrap up. Okay, so we're moving. I'm your host, Mia Henry. I'm with Freedom Lifted, and I'm also with my great colleague, Sean Whitehorn. We're both with Freedom Lifted, host civil rights tours to Memphis, to Mississippi, and to Alabama.
These are some of the people that are on.
And we will ask, we're going to ask everyone to mute as you come in, if possible.
With her in this presentation. Okay. And these are some of the people that.
We are hearing someone speak. Just be mindful.
Right?
Yes, yes. I don't know if you can. Are you able to mute folks at the top? Okay, so we're from Freedom Lifted, Civil Rights Tours to Memphis, Alabama, and Mississippi. We do those for young folks, and we also do social justice facilitation and training for people of all ages.
When the intros is going to do that.
Would you just had her on the right side, Carolyn? She was on there. How come you took her off? Yeah, there she is.
Yeah, she's there.
So I'd like to introduce to you Carolyn Michael Banks from A Tour of Possibilities. Carolyn Michael Banks is the owner and founder of A Tour of Possibilities, an African-American history tour of Memphis, Tennessee. Carolyn is a native of the Bronx, New York, and lived there until she attended Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. After school, Carolyn relocated to Washington, D.C. and began working for a sightseeing company in various capacities. She quickly rose through the ranks and became general manager of one of the largest themed sightseeing tour companies in the country. As GM, Carolyn chose to include African-American history in the script, which was woefully missing. But these changes were not readily accepted by the CEO. The company moved her to develop and launch operations in Savannah, Georgia, and then in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After Michael Banks was downsized and decided to develop a tour of possibilities in Philadelphia, she met the man of her dreams, and she married him and moved where he lived in Memphis. Thus, A Tour of Possibilities in Memphis became a reality. ATOP's mission is to share the historical and cultural gems that African Americans have contributed to Memphis. They aim to take visitors and residents alike on an eye-opening journey that enlightens and entertains. ATOP shares a perspective of history of Memphis that traditional tours of the city do not provide. I have personally been able to take one of these tours, and it was one of the most informative, enjoyable, and personal tours I've ever seen. They really do share a Memphis that you can feel. On August 6th of this year, A Tour of Possibilities will celebrate its 6th anniversary. ATOP has been ranked the second best tour in Memphis and has received TripAdvisor Certificate of Excellence for 2017, 2018, and 2019, 3 years in a row. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce to you A Taste of ATOP with Carolyn Michael Banks.
Greetings, greetings, and welcome, family. I say family because now that we're connected, we are family forever. So if you didn't know that, you know that now. But I also want to start by thanking Mia and Sean, because this is really what support looks like. I only met Mia recently, but I'm so excited that we have an opportunity to share this together. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to share this presentation once I thought that I had everything exactly where I wanted it to be. Let's see. Here we go. Don't you just love things that are live? Don't you love it? Okay, let's try this. And this presentation is obviously for those who have possibly never been to Memphis, who possibly never even thought about coming to Memphis. For those of you who are born and raised here in Memphis, but hopefully those who've never been here, just a glimpse into this incredible city. Now, this is how we're going to roll today. As Mia mentioned, there's a little chat section, and I will ask a few questions along the way. So if you would, when I ask a question, if you could respond in the chat, and Sean, who's helping us navigate this, will read this back to me. So let's start, just a quick test. If you understand that command or request, please put the number 1. And Sean, let me see when you see a couple of number 1s come through.
I'm seeing a rain of number 1s coming through.
Oh, let it rain, let it rain. All right, very good. Let's get started. So I have a question. Here's my very first question. When I say Memphis to you, I want you to write in that chat box the very first thing that comes to mind. So when I say Memphis, you say, start writing. And I know you want to yell at your screen, but I can't hear you, so this is all right. So just start writing. And what you see, Sean, just share with me, would you please?
I'm seeing blues, music, barbecue, the Mississippi River, civil rights, Elvis Presley, sanitation worker strike, history, cowboys, music and barbecue.
Cowboys, we won't go there. Okay, go ahead. All right.
Heat the South.
Okay, this is good. This is a very good start. And usually those are the same I get when I ask this on tour. But request for you. First of all, thank you for participating. But I have a request. The next time someone says Memphis to you, I'd like for you to think Africa, because that's where the name Memphis comes from. It's now what we call Cairo, Egypt, set right there on the Nile River. Our Memphis sits right here on the mighty, mighty Mississippi River. Now, what's interesting is when the founders, and please note, I'm putting them in air quotes because you really can't find something that someone else found before you, speaking specifically of the Native Americans that were here 10,000 years before Memphis was officially founded. But that to the side. The thing that's important to me is that those who came here knew the importance of Memphis in Africa, and that's why they chose the name for this city. Now, when I asked, what do you think about Memphis? When you first hear it, someone mentioned the Mississippi River. And that is just an incredible place to spend some time. Now, here's the thing. The Mississippi River runs over 2,000 miles long and goes through 10 states. And what tends to happen now is we tend to kind of romanticize the river. Now we go down there and watch the sunset. We have these incredible bridges that light up at night. But when you look or think about the Mississippi River, I want you to think about it as a transportation hub way before FedEx was even thought of. And it was on this river where the two commodities that really helped grow this city extraordinarily were transported. One, cotton. The other, enslaved people. Now, as you look at this particular slide, you're going to see the riverboat bringing some of that cotton to the shore. You'll also see the name Tom Lee. Now, if you're familiar with Tom Lee, just put a 1 in that chat box or put a 0 if you've never heard the name. A 1 if you've heard of him, a 0 if you've not. What you see, Sean?
I'm seeing a mix of 0s and 1s, but more 1s than 0s.
Very good. So Tom Lee is a name I hope that you, from this point forward, will never forget. He was an African-American man back in 1925, was out there on the Mississippi River in his little boat just minding his business. And he saw a steamship capsize. He immediately went over and started rescuing people. And he rescued 32 people. Now, I know if I could hear you, you'd be going, wow, that's amazing. But let me tell you what's miraculous. Tom Lee could not swim. And when it was all over, they came up to him and they said, now why? Why would you do such a thing? Because let's remember the period of time we're in, 1925. And this is when blacks and whites weren't exactly having a kumbaya moment in Memphis. And so he simply said, I saw what had to be done and I did it. So this man, who is now being memorialized in what is known as Tomley Park. Look at the center of the screen. You're going to see one of the first memorials built for him. It's in the Egyptian obelisk form, but you'll also see right next to it just the base, because that obelisk has been hit twice by strong winds and lightning. And if you can see really carefully where it says Tomley Memorial, underneath, a very worthy Negro was how it was placed back there in the 1950s. And just as a side as well, Tom Lee was one of the first African Americans admitted into working for the sanitation department, and I'll talk about more of that later. I just mentioned how important cotton and slavery was here in Memphis. Memphis was the center of the slave trade in the Mid-South, and as I mentioned, cotton was king. Now, this particular piece I want you to see, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Here we go, another question. How many people have heard of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital? 1 if you've heard of it, 0 if you've not. Sean, what you see?
I'm seeing a good mix, but more ones than zeros.
Excellent. So St. Jude Children's Research Hospital started as a result of Danny Thomas. Some of you who might have enough gray hair might remember Danny Thomas was a very famous actor, but when he was struggling, he went to prayer. And you know, sometimes that's the only time we go is when we're struggling, but that's another conversation. But he prayed to St. Jude. He said, St. Jude, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll do something for you. Just help me out. Well, Danny Thomas was a man of his word, and he chose to build, in honor of St. Jude, the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The reason, though, he chose to build a hospital for children was because when he was struggling, he heard of a young African-American boy right here in the Memphis area that had been tragically injured in an accident. And he was taken from hospital to hospital only to be rejected because of the color of his skin. And that's when Danny Thomas decided he was going to build a hospital for all children. The other thing I want you to notice is the picture in the top left corner. Paul Revere Williams. He was an African-American architect known as the architect to the stars, and Danny Thomas chose him to design the very first building on the campus. But let me tell you this, when he shared that information with the people of Memphis, there were a number of people here that said, oh, no, 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 you cannot bring that Negro up in here. And Danny Thomas simply said, well, either I have who I want or I take this idea somewhere else. And let me tell you, the campus is enormous. We're so proud to have this facility in our backyard as it treats children with catastrophic diseases from all over the world, but for absolutely no cost to the family. Healthcare, the way it should be. You'll also see on this particular slide, Dr. Rudolph Jackson, the first African-American doctor at St. Jude, and he's established the sickle cell program in 1968. Running parallel to St. Jude is a street that was once called Auction Avenue. It's now called A.W. Willis Avenue. And A.W. Willis was an African-American businessman and an attorney. In fact, he was the attorney of record to help someone get into, in fact, an African-American get into Ole Miss, also known as the University of Mississippi. Can anyone answer this question? What was the name of the African-American man first admitted into Ole Miss? Please put your answers in the chat section. Da, 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 da. Okay, Sean, what you see?
James Meredith from Two Responses. 3.
There you go, James Meredith, exactly right, congratulations. And the other thing I want you to notice that on this street, if you were here, you would see on that very street several of the markers that are on the left side of the screen, brown with white lettering, reading Trail of Tears. One of the original routes taken by those Native Americans once they were expelled from this territory. It would have led them down to the Mississippi River. They would have crossed over into Arkansas and then migrate into Oklahoma. Not far away on that very street, there is a boulder that sits in the middle of a large grassy area. You'll see the boulder pictured here. It's surrounded by a low green fence. This was once known as Auction Square. Now, there is research that will tell you that those here were auctioned off right on top of that boulder. But that's not correct, because the boulder was not placed there until 1924, way after the Civil War was over. Some will also tell you that that's where Hernando de Soto stood, and he saw the Mississippi River for the very first time. Let me also share with you that's not correct either. And I point out those inaccuracies to remind us how important it is how history is written. If history is not written in truth, you will learn it in a certain way, and that will actually skew how you see things happening today. And if you look at what's happening today, it's real clear that some people think this is something. There is nothing new under the sun. The fact that we've never taught it correctly and taught it truth is really one of the major issues we're dealing with now. So I'm going to ask you, those of you who write, please write what's going on today, because my fear is in 10 to 15 years in the history books, it won't be recorded correctly. For me, please. Just around the corner from there, because I'm telling you, there's history around every corner here in Memphis, and a lot of it has to do with African-American history. The old Shelby County Jail. Notice in the top right corner, you'll see a low white building surrounded by black wrought iron fence. That's what it looks like today. But look to your left, and you'll see what it looked like originally. It was built in the late 1800s, and it was built to be absolutely, positively escape-proof. So not one prisoner escaped from that jail, not one, nope. Now 40 did, but not one. Needless to say, the people who were running it said, you know what, this isn't quite working the way we planned, so they shut it down. It later became a dog pound. Not sure if dogs escaped, but they shut it down again. But I'm sure in years soon, very soon, this will probably be purchased by someone and it'll become an incredible space. But just across the street from the old Shelby County Jail, notice in the bottom right corner of your screen, there is a relatively new historical marker that reads, the lynching of Lee Walker. Lee Walker was an African-American man who back in 1893 was accused of assaulting two white women. They captured him and placed him in the jail I just mentioned to you. That evening, 3,000 people surrounded that jail. A mob surrounded that jail, broke into the jail, pulled Mr. Lee Walker out and lynched him where you see that sign today. What I also want you to know is once they lynched him, as in many lynchings, it didn't stop there. They burned his body and took parts of it home as souvenirs. I also want you to know that the women who allegedly were assaulted by Mr. Walker never even identified him. Not far from there is a place called the Jacob Burkle Estate, also known as Slave Haven. In 1849, a German immigrant came to Memphis to participate in the Underground Railroad. Now, we know that is not a train that went underground, but because of our educational system, there's still questions to some, but it was a lot of safe routes, a lot of safe houses. Well, this particular structure was built by Jacob Burkle, and it is now a museum. Well, they will take you on a guided tour through the house. And I got to tell you, the part of that tour that really moves me the most is when they take you down into the cellar, because then you're in the very same space where those who were attempting to find their way to freedom hid until it was safe to leave that house. Now, when it was safe, they get down to the river, not far away, get on some boat and just head north. They were heading to what we call the free states. Again, I'm putting that in air quotes, because those are the states that were not to have freedom. But in 1850, there was something called the Fugitive Slave Act. And that was the act that stated, if we capture you in these free states, we're going to bring you right back to where you started from. And that's why so many African Americans, when possible, kept going north to get to Canada, because the Fugitive Slave Act was not applicable in Canada. Now, here's a name, Nathan Bedford Forrest, that might be familiar to some. It was in Memphis where he gained most of his wealth in the slave trading industry. He even would have newspaper articles or advertisements that would read, fresh Negroes, delivered daily, fresh as you could buy them. Now, I want you to note the pictures on this screen. The first one you'll see is a historical marker placed there in the 1950s that not only said this is where Forrest used to live, but it also says in the very middle, it says where his business enterprises made him wealthy. Very important piece that's not there. What were his business enterprises? In the center, you'll see a statue as he sits upon his horse. Next to that, you'll see the protest that took place here in Memphis. And then down in the bottom left corner, you'll see that we were successful in getting that statue down on December 20th, 2017 at exactly 9:01 p.m. The time significance, 9:01, that's our area code. But also keep looking at that screen, you'll see another marker. This was unveiled on April 4th, 2018, the day we were commemorating the assassination of Dr. King, and there is the rest of the story, Forrest and the Memphis slave trade. Did I also mention that Forrest was one of the very first grand wizards of the KKK? Well, this marker actually tells the rest of that story that most Memphians never knew. And part of history is getting the story right and telling it in truth. How many people recognize the Green Book? Put a 1 in the chat box, or 0 if you've never heard of such a thing, the Green Book. As you do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The Green Book was written between 1930s and 1960s, primarily to help African Americans navigate through this country where they can eat safely, sleep, where they could get gas, because you needed to know where it was safe to do so. Also on famous Beale Street, the iconic street once known as the Negro Main Street, USA, there is now a place called the Blue City Cafe, pretty decent ribs there. But on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see it was once known as the Hotel Clark. You'll also see it says the best service for colored only. Because if you didn't have the Green Book, you needed to know that was a place you could go if you were African American. So Sean, do we have any answers to why it was called the Green Book? Or did I not ask the question?
Didn't ask it just yet, but great question.
Okay, let me give you a couple moments, just a moment. Why was it called the Green Book? Yes, it was green sometimes, the color, yes, but there's another reason. Anything, Sean, you see there?
We have from Kenneth Hugo Green and from Andrew, named after the New York City mailman who wrote it.
Exactly. Victor Hugo Green was the name, and I'm so glad you mentioned he was from New York. You know, as a Bronx girl, I got to represent. Yes, he was definitely right out of Harlem. Very good. Here we have something else relatively new. It's called the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Reflection Park. It too was unveiled during MLK 50. That incredible structure that you see, designed by an African-American artist, Richard Hunt, called the Mountaintop, the name of Dr. King's last speech. You can go there, relax, think about and reflect on Dr. King, which I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but I have a feeling Dr. King would ask you the following question. What are you doing today for the cause? Great to reflect, but it's action that gets things to move. Here's something else. I'm so excited. Memphis last year launched something called the Memphis Heritage Trail. So our history is no longer hidden. As you go through the streets of Memphis in the center, you're going to see a marker, a wayfinder that will help you identify those locations that you may never knew that they existed. You'll see some incredible murals as you go through our city. You'll see one on the left-hand side called the Civil Rights Mural, and then one of my absolute favorite, the I Am a Man mural. And I'll talk about the I Am a Man significance very shortly. And of course, if you come to Memphis and you don't go to the National Civil Rights Museum, I'll find you. You need to get here. Even if you live here and it's been a while since you've been there, you need to go. Let's start. Top left-hand corner, you'll see something that reads the Lorraine Hotel. This was once an all-white hotel called the Marquette Hotel. In the 40s, it was sold to an African-American couple, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Bailey, who changed the name from the Marquette to the Lorraine. You'll also see in the center, they depict the transatlantic slave trade with a kind of way for you to get a sense of what it was in the hulls. But you'll also see the balcony with room 306 with the red and white wreath in front. That was the balcony where Dr. King stood before he was assassinated. And as you look in the bottom left corner, it's as if you were standing near the spot where Dr. King stood. And as you look deep into that photograph, you'll see a brick building in the distance. That was the boarding house where they say James Earl Ray rented a room. And on the night of April 4th, took out a gun and a rifle and shot Dr. King. But I wish I had time, but there's a lot of controversy over what happened there. And the other thing I want to show you is the sanitation truck that many of those men had to deal with. And again, I'll give more information on that in a moment. Not far from the National Civil Rights Museum is this marker that reads 1866 Memphis Massacre. It is in the area we call South Memphis. And on May 1st, 1866, soon after the Civil War was over, there was a skirmish between the newly released African-American soldiers and the police. It escalated from May 1st to May 3rd. At the end of the day on May 3rd, 46 African-Americans had been murdered. 5 women were raped. 91 homes and just about all the schools and churches in that neighborhood were burned to the ground. It was so horrific that Congress sent an investigative team here to find out what happened. They came, they investigated, they got a lot of information, but no one was ever brought to justice. This marker was initially going to read 1866 Memphis riots. But because of the work of our local NAACP branch office and the National Park Service, they said, thanks, no thanks. We're going to put the marker up ourselves so that it reads correctly. 1866 Memphis Massacre. Again, history can only be as good as how well it is written, and that was not a riot. Here, this incredible structure that you see, this is now called Claiborne Temple. It was built back in the late 1800s and was known as the Second Presbyterian Church. But again, that neighborhood started changing in the 40s, and it was sold to the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church. This church was very significant during the sanitation workers' strike of 1968. This is where those men would gather daily before their protest marches began. This is where Dr. King came on March 28th to lead those men in a protest rally or protest march. Unfortunately, 25 minutes after that march began, violence breaks out. Dr. Wafer, he's devastated because the press is here, as he knew they would be, but they were following and capturing the events of the violence and not of the issues of the sanitation workers. Can I repeat that one more time? They were here to capture the violence and not the issues of the sanitation workers. Does that sound familiar to you today? Capturing violence and not the issue that really is behind everything that's going on? Again, nothing is new under the sun. This is now getting ready to be opened once again. I cannot wait till we're able to step foot back into such an incredible place. And then here you're going to see these men in I Am a Man Plaza. This is right next door to Claiborne Temple. You'll see the men symbolizing the sanitation workers carrying those I Am a Man signs because they needed to do that. Because not only were they asking for a raise, which ended up being 10 cents more an hour after it was all over, but they were not being treated as men. That was also a situation because 2 men were killed in a trash compactor that had malfunctioned and they were crushed to death, leading to that strike beginning. This structure is incredible during the day as you can see it, but I also want you to see the power of it at night and what it looks like at night. That low gray wall in the center, very reminiscent of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in DC, but on that wall are the names of the 1,300 sanitation workers. Again, never to forget them. Sometimes in history, we remember the big names, but we don't remember those individuals who really stepped out on some serious faith, risking everything to get what it is they actually deserved. And here's another church, because in church, let me tell you, Memphis is a church, woo! We have so many churches, you would think this would be one of the holiest places on the planet. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. But this is not your average everyday church. This is the world headquarters for the Church of God in Christ, Mason Temple, started by Charles Harrison Mason, who was after slavery was over, and he taught himself how to read and write. And from that beginning, he started a denomination that is now worldwide and has over 6 million members. And it was in this structure, where Dr. King gave his very last and prophetic speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," less than 24 hours before he was assassinated. And to think he almost never gave that speech. He wasn't feeling that day and stayed at the Lorraine Motel. But that's when Ralph Abernathy and a couple of other of the entourage went there for a sanitation workers rally. And when they arrived, it was filled to capacity. Everybody's up and they're clapping and they're excited because they're gonna see Dr. King up close and personal, but not quite. So Dr. Ralph Abernathy went to the phone call down to Dr. King and said, "Please come, they don't want us." And so when he stood there and gave that speech, he was really just kind of going right off the top of his head. And the real meat of that speech was talking about how we as African Americans need to support each other in our businesses. We have enough that we have done that we can support each other. We used to have to do it. Now that it's an option, should not be that, because we should still support one another. And that's what he was speaking about before he was killed. Economic power. The fact that we were able to sit anywhere on the bus was one thing, but he knew the power was in economics. So hopefully when you come back to Memphis, even those of you who live here, you'll be able to go in and just stand in that space. Because I tell you, when you're standing at that pulpit and you know that Dr. King stood there, something happens. Something happens. And I'm never the same anytime I leave it. So thank you, A-Top and Freedom Lifter. We're so excited for this opportunity to share some of the richness in this city. And if there are any questions, we'll get to them in just a moment, but I have something else to share with you. And here it is, the Memphis Caravan Tour. Now, as we all are aware, COVID-19 has changed our lives probably forever. And many businesses have been having challenges, and we were definitely one of them. March 17th was our last tour. And so, as the name of the company implies, something had to happen. Possibilities are endless. That's how I was raised. And so trying to figure out how to do what I do without having contact with people. And so the Caravan Tour was born. It didn't come from me, so I must give credit where credit is due. Toyota did a tour 2 years ago in Memphis, and they called it the Caravan Tour. It was called Steeped in History. And we had 8 vehicles following us going through the city. So it's not an original idea, but I'm so glad I had the opportunity to experience it so I can rebirth it now. But now all you do is you get behind the van and you hook into a link when you arrive at our beginning location and follow us through the city, and you hear the tour through the speakers in your car via Bluetooth. So that is getting ready to launch this Friday. It was intentionally set for this day, because that is Juneteenth, June 19th of this year, where we commemorate those who were in Texas who did not receive the word that they were free until 2 years later. So I'm giving you the word that you are free to join us starting this Saturday as our public tours begin and they open. We'd love to have you come aboard. And if that's not enough for you, we got something else coming for you in July for those of you who absolutely love flexibility. Instead of joining us at specific times, you will have an app that you will be able to download, and then it'll be location centered. So as you drive through the streets of Memphis, you'll hear my voice come on as you approach a stop. I'll tell you all about it. I'll give you turn-by-turn directions. Do it at midnight if you so desire, but there's really flexibility there. So a lot is getting ready to happen. And before I turn it back over to Sean, I got one more thing to share with you, because one of the things I loved doing when guests would come to the vehicle to start their tour is give them a big old hug. I told you at the beginning of this presentation that once you come in contact, you family. So that's just how we roll. But this is how I want you to remember how we do things. We got to do the Wakanda salute to make sure that you are welcome. And thank you so much. Sean, back to you.
Carolyn, absolutely amazing. You all, I hope that you all can give her a round of applause in the remote way that you can. As Mia mentioned, well, one, Carolyn, thank you so much for so much amazing information. And as Mia mentioned in the beginning, we're going to open this up for questions that folks who've been joining us, particularly in Zoom, for those that are on Facebook Live. If there are any questions for Carolyn, any history of Memphis that you'd like to ask about, now is certainly the time. For those that are joining us in Zoom, you can put the questions in the chat section. And then for Facebook Live, if you want to put any questions there, they'll be funneled back over here. And so, yeah, standing by for any questions.
Don't all ask at once. Take your time. Take your time. It's all good.
Hello, Miss Caroline.
Hello.
Hey, hello, my name is Amani, and I don't really have a question, but I just say that was like in the comments, I said that was really some great information, and I have learned a couple of things that I did not know about. But it was, I wanted to mention how when like I've in class in school, I've been taught like so many things about slavery, and we would watch videos about blackface and KKK and all that stuff and racist cartoons. But it's like I haven't really learned anything like positive about our history in school. Like my parents and my family taught me the positive things that these different people that I never heard of done. But in school, it wasn't the same way. So I had to learn it from my family. But anyways, I just want to say it's so many people who has like done great things, and like I would love to learn more about these people I never heard of. But yeah, I would say I would like to like learn some more things and continue like attending these classes.
Thank you so much. And you have no idea how you just made my heart go pitter patter, because asking is exactly what needs to happen. The curiosity has to be there. The information is actually available, and you've learned more than when I was growing up, and I've been around for more than a minute. So these gray hairs are not colored in, they're serious. But back to what you were saying is that we have to be real clear that the kind of information we want to receive most likely will never be taught. So we have to just acknowledge that. But since we know that, what are we going to do to make sure that you get that information? And I'm really going to put it back on you. What are you going to do? And I know you're already starting to keep doing the research necessary. So not only do you teach yourself, but you teach others that come in your space. Because the one thing that often happens when I tell people what it is that I do, one of their first reactions is, oh, I'm going to have to hear about this slavery thing. Well, yeah, you are. But that's not the only thing I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about entrepreneurs yesterday and today. And we're talking about people who were doing things without the resources that are now available to us. There really is no excuse. So I am so thrilled that you chose to join this. In fact, I think you were the first one in the room. So you already get kudos from me. But thank you for your interest. And please, you got Google. You can do some serious work on your own. But all I'm going to ask you, as you get the work done, share what you've learned. Not just to your peers, but to the adults in your space as well.
Yes, and
yes, I will.
oh yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Ooh. Yes, yes. Thank you. I heard another voice in the background. Yes.
Hey, Carolyn, we have another question from Facebook Live from Ryan Fong. Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. He asks, is there a Venmo or a website that we can connect to thank you for this knowledge?
Shaw, please. No, yes, absolutely. It is, I'm sorry, atopmemphis.com, atopmemphis.com. That's the website. And on the website, there is a link for gift cards. And that's the location where if you would like to bless it, go right ahead. So it's atopmemphis.com. Gift cards. Thank you.
Hey, Awesome. Yes. Hey, Carolyn, we have a question from Sharif. He asked, what is the cost of the virtual tour?
The tour that is called the Caravan Tour is $45 per person. And that's for those who are ages 5 to 99. So if you're under 5, you're free. If you're over 99, you're free. But it's $45 per person.
Awesome. Keena King asks, can you tell us more about the murals?
The murals, the ones that we saw, should I try and go back to it? Oh, you asking for something here. Let me just go back to look, am I actually gonna do this? Lord, you know, being a seasoned individual, it's all good. So the one on the left is called the Civil Rights Mural, and that's located in downtown Memphis. And that actually tells a lot of our history here in the city of Memphis, from the contraband camps that those who were recently actually went to here in our city. You'll see underneath that in the kind of the aquamarine blue, those are members of the U.S. colored troops that were stationed here as well. Underneath that, if you can see kind of a woman in a deep burgundy and lavender top, that is Ida B. Wells, one of my sheroes, Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells is not from Memphis, but she lived here. And she went through an experience here in Memphis when she was on her way home. The conductor was on a train. The conductor came up to her and said, lady, you got to move to another car. And she said, oh, no, sir. I purchased my first class ticket for this seat, and this is where I'm going to stay. He said, you don't seem to understand. You don't understand what I'm saying to you. And he goes to physically lift her up out of her seat, throws her off the train. Ida B. Wells gets back to Memphis and sues the railroad and wins $500. Now, that's a lot of money back then. But unfortunately, 3 years later, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned that ruling. But I digress. Getting back to the mural. There's also right underneath Ida B. Wells is a portrait of Robert Church, one of the first African-American millionaires in the South. And if it wasn't for Robert Church, Beale Street wouldn't be. He was the one who really developed Beale Street because he understood what it meant to own land. He knew what it was like to be owned. His mother was an enslaved African. His father was a white steamboat captain. But from those beginnings, he became one of the first millionaires, African-American millionaires in the South. So that's just some of the things on that particular mural. And then to the one that I absolutely love, as I mentioned, the I Am a Man mural, also located on Main Street in Memphis. Hope that shared some information for you.
Thanks, Carolyn. We have another question. We have another question from Alejandra Morales, who's joining us from Facebook Live. Thank you, Alejandra, for joining us. She asks, or this person asks, what steps do you recommend for us to take to promote, center, uplift, showcase, and write about our real histories and stories that are not centered?
When I had made the request that you start writing, it could be as easy as writing on Facebook. There are those who are ready to actually delve into writing papers. There are those who are ready to write books. My desire is that enough is written. So no matter who looks for it, like maybe Imani, they'll be able to find it and be able to find out what actually happened. Because as we know, unfortunately, certain people who write this history are not writing it truthfully because it's not comfortable. And this tour was actually birthed out of history not being written comfortably. There was a time when I was working for that national sightseeing tour company, and when I became general manager, made the decision to add African-American history to our script. I'm thinking this is the best thing since sliced bread. It was woefully missing, as Mia had mentioned earlier. But my CEO calls me. I'm thinking he's calling to congratulate me for doing such a good thing. But his thing to me was, what's all this black stuff? And I'm like, oh my gosh, was there, grease on the seat? Do I need to send somebody a check or something? He said, it's not grease. I said, are you talking about the fact that I have chosen to add African-American history to the script? He said, I'm getting calls, I'm getting letters that people are just too uncomfortable with information. Well, history is often uncomfortable, especially as it pertains to African-Americans. So I'm asking you to write in any form you have that tells the real story. Struggles are good, but triumphs are as equally good, because we have to know the stuff that runs through these veins of ours have purpose. And we stand on the shoulders of ancestors who would have given their eye tooth be in the situation we're in today. 100%. So please, I hope that answered your question, but just write in any way, shape, or form that you can.
And thanks, Carolyn. Tasha Downey. Hey, Tasha. She
Uh-oh,
asked,
Tasha in the house.
she asked, what's your favorite book, movie, or TV show about Memphis history?
Ooh, that's hard. There's a lot. I got one. I just got to roll over and pull it up because it's really heavy. Hold on. And this one, I don't know if many people are aware of it, but it's called Race, Representation, and Photography in Memphis by Dr. Jenkins. And I was never really into art very much, but this professor, Dr. Ernestine Jenkins, is extraordinary in how she tells the story through art in Memphis. So that is now one of my favorites.
Thanks, Carolyn. We have a question from a master quilter, Ms. Dorothy, who asks, are quilts part of the tour?
Quilts are not specifically part of the tour. We will talk about them when we're by Slave Haven as ways that many were able to find where they needed to go, kind of like a map when we're by Slave Haven. But we do mention it. We just don't have any on board to share. But absolutely, we'll definitely keep that as part of our narrative.
Karen Boozer asks, can your tours be customized?
Yes, they can. We do have a basic tour, but we do work with groups who prefer to perhaps do a little different things, and we're very open to that. I actually get excited by that because one of the things I love about doing what I do is that it's not as if you learn it all and it's done. As Memphis continues to evolve, the more I learn, because as I mentioned earlier, as Mia mentioned, I'm not a native Memphian. I'm a boogie down Bronx girl, and I had a really large learning curve to overcome to get this information. But I tell you, I just never knew there was so much here. So, whew, yes, it can be customized, and excited about the opportunity and the possibilities for that.
Thank you. Cynthia Elliott asked, can you explain your symbol, the symbol for ATOP?
Yes, in the bottom right corner, thank you for that question, is a lot of people ask me if that's an Adinkra symbol. Well, it's actually my rendition of a place called A Door of No Return. So let me go back a bit. One of the reasons why the company is called the Tour of Possibility, I grew up with a family who truly believed in possibilities. And one of them was the opportunity to go to Ghana, West Africa at the age of 14. Now, some might say, well, what's the big deal there? I want you to picture this. I'm in the projects, living on the 6th floor, you know, in an apartment with 5 folk. And my mother comes home from Harlem Hospital where she worked. And she's like, Carolyn, would you like to go to Africa? And I'm like, yeah, sure. We'll go to Africa this week. We'll go to the moon next week. It's just not that I didn't think I would ever go, but the possibilities did not seem there. But I did have a chance to go there to celebrate my 14th birthday. And one of the places, one of the slave castles. And there's a place in the slave castle called the Door of No Return. And I can, just as if it were yesterday, remember standing in that space. And my life, I got to tell you, just transformed. Standing in the space where those who had been captured were now getting ready to go on these boats and these ships to go to places they had never known or heard about, and know that they would probably never come home. And that 14-year-old experience that kind of got me on this path to wanting to tell the stories of our people. And that particular symbol is my rendition of my drawing, because drawing was not my strong suit. And singing, I tell you, if you knew my dad, you would understand. I would call and wish him a happy birthday, and he lived till he was 91. And every year I called, he said, daughter, no, this was not one of your gifts. You know, so that's what that symbol is. It's my rendition of the Door of No Return that truly changed my life.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Well, it looks like there are no remaining questions. If there are any last minute questions, I mean, please feel free to enter them into the Zoom chat. And I would say if there are any other questions coming from Facebook Live to do so. But in closing, if there aren't any coming through, we really want to thank each and every person that has joined this call today. And we want to thank you for, let's see. Okay, Mia, thank you for responding to that. We want to thank every single person that has taken the time out of their schedule to join us today. We are especially thankful to Miss Carolyn, who has dedicated her time and her energy to sharing this really helpful knowledge with us. We're excited about groups like ATOP who, considering COVID-19, a lot of us are being asked to shift and consider the ways in which we do things, and the way that Carolyn has been able to be resilient and to pivot in the way that the tours are being carried out in the context of COVID. This is what real resilience looks like. This is something that our ancestors have had to embody, is being resilient in times of difficulty. And Carolyn has answered the call and is committed to the call of this history and is pivoting. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's see. I'm gonna look back in the questions. We have a question from Mohammed. What is the app that was mentioned in the Zoom?
The one for the audio tour, if you could respond to that, Mohammed. There's going to be an app for the audio tour.
He said.
Yes,
he said
I will share that once we're ready to launch. So I would like to ask those of you who have joined us today to just either go to my Facebook page, ATOP Memphis, or to the website, so I can kind of keep you informed as to when things are launching. And I cannot wait for that to happen. That is another one of my, wow, I kind of thought about doing this, but God works in mysterious ways. And he said, you know, I've been asking you to do this. So now this COVID-19 has really pushed me to do things I had considered, but that will be shared with you when we're ready to launch.
Awesome. Awesome.
And if you're still looking, I just have to say one thing for those of you who know me, who have joined us today, can I just say thank you? I knew I was gonna do this. It's just the support you have shared with me over these many years. I may not have said thank you enough, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if you weren't in my corner. So as we continue on this trail, on this journey, for those of you, just support each other. You know how important it is. I think I heard a line, and I gotta thank him, excuse me, my big brother in New York. And so I just really want to thank all of you. And the other person I know, I start calling out names, I'll get in trouble, but Norris Jones, who I met many, many years ago, I got out of college. He was the one who, when I started this tour in Philadelphia, made me do it. I kept telling him I was going to do it. And he says, I'm coming to Philly with my aunt. You need to be ready. So you just don't know. You don't know the role that you could play in somebody's life. And so I really thank him for pushing me to get ATOP born. It had to be reborn again, but thank you all.
Thank you so much for those words, Carolyn.
I'm just gonna step in here and just tell you, Carolyn, you are a star. It's easy to support you because you give so much. And we are just so blessed to know you and to have this opportunity to share this important and relevant history today. So we want to thank you also from Freedom Lifted for all that you've done, and tell you how grateful we are for your partnership.
Awesome, awesome. These are two phenomenal organizations led by two phenomenal women of color, two Black women. Whatever we can do in these times to support, if there are any ideas, any ways that you want to support, feel free to. Websites have been throughout the chat. And then the final note for you all is that the video will be posted on the Freedom Lifted page and on the Facebook page and on YouTube in the coming days. There was some really amazing information that came through today, and I'm sure that there are many others who would benefit. So feel free to check out that video in the next few days. And if all hearts and minds agreed, it has been such a journey today, and we look forward to being in touch for future programming, conversation, and events. Take care.